Okay, hey, everyone. We're going to get started in this first trans mic of the year. I'm super excited to be in conversation this morning with Emmanuel Brown, who was among the last conversations that I had on my podcast, TransLash podcast, in December about how to take care of yourself for the holidays. But I don't know about y'all, but I have been really struggling with the beginning of this year with, in so many ways, the repeat of the pain and the death and all of the rest of it from 2020. It feels like we've gone back in time. And so when I was trying to figure out what was the best way to begin this conversation, sorry, the best way to begin this year, I said, I need to have a conversation with Emmanuel about trans joy because one of the things that Emmanuel says is that joy is a radical act. That may not be the exact phrase I'm paraphrasing, but Emmanuel will be able to tell us exactly what it is. But that notion stuck with me. And I realized that going into this year more than ever, I needed to feel that. I needed to be able to experience that. So that's why I was like, Emmanuel, can we talk about trans joy for the first Trans Mac Twitter Spaces of this year? And he agreed. So thank you so much for joining.
As always, I'm always really excited to be invited to be in conversation with you about almost anything, but joy is one of my favorite topics. And I think I am really excited. I'm a person who generally really loves like the new year energy. And it's been dragging a little bit, like it's been dragging for everyone. People are like, how is this different from 2020? Is it the same? Is it the worst? And so I was really feeling like this conversation about joy is timely. I do believe joy is a radical act. And even if I didn't say that before, I'm saying it now. Um, because why not? Yeah, I do believe joy is a radical act. I think it's a radical act. I think it's a radical position to allow yourself to be in. And for me, and I don't know about for you, Amara, when I was thinking about this conversation, I was like, oh, how do I define joy? Like what would I talk about it? Because it does feel like something that is a little bit more long-standing or able to be in the face of these times, right? Where we're looking at grief, where we're looking at just consistent uncertainty. I've become much more in tune to like what climate change actually means now. So it's like that's a whole train that's running, but I'm like, I don't think I can stop that train. So what do I do? So for me, joy really is this deep commitment to accessing both beauty and pleasure and connection in a world that would have us not do so. So I'm wondering for you, as you're thinking about this conversation about joy, what does joy mean for you in these times?
I think that joy is very deeply connected to hope.
Mm,
I think that joy is tied to a sense of possibility. I'm talking about how I feel when I feel these things. I
hmm
when I feel joy, I think that joy is tied to a sense of possibility, hope, wonder, um, and happiness. Right in that
hmm
moment, like I'm thinking about when we used to be able to get together and dance with
hmm
other people, or any of these other things. What was I feeling when I felt joy? And I think I am being reminded as you query me on this that like when I feel joy, that doesn't mean the absence of other things. Like
That's right.
if I am joyful in a moment, that doesn't mean that I feel that everything is right with the world and that I'm in a state of bliss, which is different, right?
hmm
Um,
hmm
but joy I do think is linked to those things, and I think it does spring from connection, and I think that it does spring um, from from literally this sense of possibility. It's something in that, and it can be possibility about what the body is doing. It's possibility about the world. It is what you're seeing that is opening your eyes or opening your spirit.
Mhm.
But I think that those are some of the things that I think about when I feel joy.
Yeah, I think that piece that you're bringing up about how rooted in connection it is for many of us, and I would say, I would dare to even say for most people, um, we might count some of our joyous moments when we're at least with one other person or being or space. And I think we're all feeling the fatigue of being. Are we afraid of connection? Is it
Mm.
virtual connection? How good is it? Is it that good? To be virtually connecting to people all the time. What does that look like for folks like me who are single and don't have children? There is a kind of like, oh, isolative experiences that are in my home, but I have all of these beautiful virtual friendships that I get to carry out. And maybe throughout time, I'm able to figure out, like, okay, can we meet in a safe way or things like that, but mostly relying on digital connection. And so, that was the other thing that I thought about. I was like, we all need like refreshers on like how to connect, even if we're in situations where we can like leave the house more frequently or feel comfortable doing those types of things, or even traveling to where our people are and being able to have extended stays or visits. It's almost like a refresher course after 2 years of really being told, through this COVID moment that like connection was dangerous, right? Like being close was dangerous and is dangerous to the health and the life and the well being of the people that you love. And so, I've been thinking about like, okay, how can I refresh my connections, quite frankly, because joy for me is also in that place of connection. And so, one of the things that I feel really committed to in 2022 is to create those places, those safe containers of being together, right? So there's a group of, a small group of friends. We're not quite a pod, but we are committed to being in safe practices, right? Whether we are distance or far. And so we've really talked about coming into this year, and I've made a request to other people to be like, listen, I want us to see each other in person, for a weekend, for a week. And like, let's start to think about what that might look like for us going into 2022. Are there other ways that you're finding yourself refreshing the way that you connect with others now, Amara, in this sort of third year of connect, not connect, be out, don't be out, and that you could offer to folks?
Yeah, I'm glad this is now a conversation. I had thought that I was actually going to mine your wisdom, but I'm happy to be in a back and forth about this. No, I think what are some of the ways that I have done? So I'm thinking about. Oh, I'll come to that in a minute. Like historical examples of joy, but for me, those moments of joy are also when I'm able to be my most relaxed and best self and feel
Mhm,
held in that. Um, which is really about, bringing that out and however that comes out, that can come
mhm,
out in so many different ways. It can come out in cooking. Like I love to cook. Like I was like, so last week, um, I invited over a friend of mine who I know was all good, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I didn't really feel like cooking because I was beginning to feel depressed, and I didn't realize I was feeling beginning to feel that way. And then like I got in the kitchen and I just started cooking. I was like, I don't really feel like doing this. And I started, and maybe 2 minutes in, I felt really happy. And then
mhm,
it just propelled me forward, right? Because it was a thing that was connecting me to my best self. And I was able to bring that forward in so many different ways. So, in the ways that I have been able to connect with people in that way, well, one thing, my friends, there's a group of friends that we had like during the height of the epidemic for over a year. We had a weekly call on Monday.
mhm,
Um, and where we were able to bring kind of everybody in to that call to support each other. And then that call basically went dormant, kind of going into the fall. And then
mhm,
we've just reestablished it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really important because, in the words of little Kim, hot damn, here we go again.
Right.
So like, so we reignited that. I think secondly for me, getting out into the world was really important. After, because I was one of those people that was locked down during COVID. That is
Mm-hmm.
to say, like, I did not leave New York City. I did not
Mm-hmm.
leave the confines of New York City. And I mean New York City, five boroughs, from March 2020 until June 2021. I didn't go
Wow.
anywhere.
Wow.
Um, and and I think I based, yeah. And so last summer, when we had that kind of opening into the fall, I started to travel because I remember after when my mother passed like 10 years ago, after a really excruciating, terrible battle with cancer, and it was really a searing experience. And
Mm-hmm.
I remember what I did after she passed and we were able to basically get all of her affairs in order is that I hit the road. Like I literally traveled the world. And I remember that, and someone asked me at the time why I did that. And I said, when you spend so much time in and around death,
Mm-hmm.
you have to swing just as hard back into life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You have to go right back into it because with the same momentum that you've been in death so that you can come out of it. And a lot of people don't do that after people have passed. And that's
Yeah.
why their depression can linger for years, even decades, because you have to fight to get back into life. And I don't mean in a denial
Absolutely.
kind of way like, oh, the epidemic is raging, so I'm going to go to sex parties. That's a different type
Right.
of thing. But I
Right.
mean, like, when you actually have the ability to be able to connect in a way that's positive, that you do that in a very substantial way. So I started traveling from last summer in a lot of different ways. And that for me was so essential because it reminded me that there were still human beings that were whole, and there were parts of
Mm-hmm.
the world that were whole, that even though we had all
Mm-hmm.
gone through the same thing, I feel like I'm like going on. So, but even though that there were parts of the entire world that experienced the same thing, that when I was in France, when I was in Greece last summer, that human beings still treated each other like with dignity and honor and respect, and so therefore there's nothing like intrinsic about this disease and experience that would lead us to a darker
Mm-hmm.
place. What's led us to a darker place is the way that our society has chosen to respond to it, right?
Right.
And that was like actually essential for me having hope. And so then I was able to remember to connect with really small things, like having an amazing piece of bread, like walking
Yes.
along a river, like little things, the small things that we can do that actually can bring us joy, an amazing piece of chocolate, a fantastic cup of coffee, those types of things.
Yeah.
And those are the things that I think that I rely on constantly to bring me joy. So it's not, it's connecting with other people in small groups that I feel safe. It's doing that remotely. Sometimes it's travel, but it's creating space to be reminded that really, really small things can bring me joy and get me through. Like, I'm talking really tiny things like a one square, cut of exquisite chocolate can like make me literally want to shout and run down the aisle. And that's joy, right? That's joy. And I have to be reminded of that.
And for me, that's been a gift of the pandemic, is to really boil down my joy to the simplest fractal, right? To be inside of, like, I love to drink tea, and the perfect cup of tea for me is like elation and bliss, and it brings me into memory and story and smell, and all of these places is the sensation inside of my body. And so I think it's really important, and for me, I say that's a gift of the pandemic, because I don't think if I had had as much time sort of just being in my every day to day to be like, oh, what is habit and what is routine and what is the actual thing that's bringing me pleasure and joy in these moments. It sounds like you have some questions to ask me, so I'll stop asking
No,
you
now it's a conversation. I mean, I think that like let's think about these small things and the way that like oppressed people have
questions.
used the small things in order to like bring joy, because this is now I get a little bit more into the tactics, but I constantly think, so for instance, I remember why, like when I was a kid, my grandparents lived in rural southwest Georgia, and I would go there during the kid of the summer. And what always struck me is like when you went to the black side of town, because literally it's railroad tracks.
Hmm.
Um, that like all of the black people had really immaculate like lawns and gardens, and then
Yep.
all their houses were painted bright colors, right? Like
Yes.
it really stands out to me as a memory. And one of the things that I realized as an adult, understanding that most of those people had spent their lives in and under oppression, that
Hmm.
those things were things that those were tools, those were technologies, those were approaches to actually get them through all the dark shit that they went through, right? That like
That's right.
painting your house a bright color was a thing that made you happy because you came home, and it was, you had a yellow house and that brought you joy. Or you know um it's not until the epidemic that I realized that there was such a thing as like rage gardening. And I was like, that's what all those black people were doing, is that they were taking
Right.
all of the rage that they were experiencing and turning it into something beautiful. And it's the tactic of using these smaller things to get us through. I don't know. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I absolutely believe in that, and I think we see that replicated within trans communities, right? It's like, being able to take the literal scraps from the thrift store and turn them into costumes and
Yep,
create something called a ball, right? Was like a
that's
novel
right.
idea, right? It wasn't out of, it was out of maybe a mirroring of a kind of opulence, but the reality of the situation was
Mm,
that it wasn't a moneyed thing, right? It was
that's
people
right.
literally taking being countercultural and the scraps of that and pulling it together and saying, yes, we are amazing and fabulous, and we're going to create a whole language, dance system, like a whole music genre,
Yeah,
and all of it. Because that's what we continually do and consistently do. I think in my, food for me is always going to be the historical connection to joy. It comes out of my family. We are a family of cooks. Like everybody kind of has their like specialty that they make. Um, and everybody, and for some of us it's sort of like those people have passed on and those dishes are gone forever because nobody was giving up their specialty. And so that is what cooking does for me. Very similar to the story that you talked about, as far as like the minute I start cooking, I know by the end, whether it's a meal that's going to take 20 minutes or 30 or 45 or an hour, I'm going to feel lifted. I'm going to experience something in my body that gets me connected to that hopefulness. I'm going to
mhm,
experience happiness, and, I'm going to be dancing around. I'm going to be listening to my music, and things like that. Some of the other things, and, especially and for me through the pandemic, traveling for work was a way I connected with a lot of trans folks who didn't necessarily live in my like immediate community.
mm,
And so when the pandemic hit, I was like, listen, I'm not about to see or be in the house with or hang out with or go to dinner with a trans person for when? I don't know when. So really institutionalizing myself to be like doing these like hangouts, where we don't know what's going to happen. Maybe we're going to turn on some music. Maybe we're going to just talk. Maybe we're going to share a meal together or have a cup of tea or a cup of coffee together. But just really having like trans hangouts. And it would just maybe be one or two or three people and just like, hey, what's going on with you today? And that felt really important. And it also gave the feeling of that sort of spontaneous connecting too. So they weren't like super planned things or they weren't super consistent things, but they really replicated for me that going to the conference and being like, oh my gosh, I haven't seen you in 6 months. Okay, let's go grab dinner today. Okay, let me tell me all the things. I'll tell you all the things. And that was really important for me as well, as something that has come up, like the way in which trans folks have been points of connection, for both work and pleasure and, learning and things like that, that it's not a connection that is always localized, right? So how to replicate that for ourselves as well. Yeah, and I think that those other, I'm thinking about something else historical for me that I've learned from my mother, who passed away in 2018. I didn't realize how much joy she got from her garden and her plants. My mother was somebody who would definitely be described as a green thumb. She would go out and get like the lowliest plant off the side of the street. And you'd be like, why have you brought this dying plant into the house? And then in 3 weeks, the thing would be taking over the entire space. And so, really tending to and creating a house garden for myself, that really is mine. It's not for anyone else. The plants that I have there are really special to me. I've nurtured them since young, and now seeing them in their sort of fourth, fifth, sixth season of growing has been really special and sweet as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think that like this idea of like gathering and connection for trans people as a source of joy and the ability to express joy, I think is very powerful and essential. And I think about like, the way that Black people gathered during slavery and then continue to
Mm-hmm.
gather now, like how, family reunions are really important. And there's this idea that when you're faced with so much, um, of hate and oppression in the world, the ability to come together to create spaces where you're able to feel free are essential. Um, and it is something that we've lost. And it's one of the reasons why, we've, as a community, have struggled with a lot of suicides over the past
Mm-hmm.
year. A lot of people have suffered depression, a lot of mental breaks because people are trapped in these either in households or in buildings or communities or work situations where they are isolated as trans people without the ability to connect with others, and that takes a really substantial toll. And I was trying to think about the ways, for instance, Marsha P. Johnson, who spent large parts of her life homeless, would create joy, which is about um and some of those ways were, as you described, like the ability to be able to like take scraps and make a fabulous hat or flowers in her
Mm-hmm.
hair and like makeup. Uh, but there was something about the ability to be able to walk around and to have what she had created and what she was manifesting in herself be a part of a community and a community expression, whether or not it was like, walking down Greenwich and having people look at her. It's still
Mm-hmm.
an exercise of her power um, through these small acts. And it's one of the things that we have that we're really struggling with. This the struggles around the inability to come together. And so I do think that like trying to find ways that we can do so in small communities or in ways that we can trust is kind of essential right now, especially for Black people who are trans, right? For Black trans people, it's kind of it's really essential. It's like it's life necessitating, as it were.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with all of that. I think the legacy of the way gatherings have played in our communities, both as Black people and as trans people and as Black trans folks, is sort of like the thing. It's like the one thing that I see when I start to see things like Southern Fried Queer Prides trying to
Yeah.
figure it out, right? Like they're just trying to figure out like how can we gather safely, because I think we all feel the pressure within our personal communities, if nothing else, and in our larger networks to say like, okay, like if we're going to make it, then we know the importance of us actually being able to be in the same room, to mirror, to reflect, to just see what's going on. There's so much that I feel like I learned in community. What was the latest, testosterone treatments, or how are people doing, who's a good doctor, like there's also that kind of like really important like health information that gets shared in those spaces. And then there's the time, I think those, what I think about is like how much time does it take to actually let go of the oppression, right? And how much time does it take
Mm,
so that you can step into that joy, right? So, having a day long Pride Fest where you start with the march in the morning and the party in the evening, right? Like that's intentional, right? Like it's the release, like to actually be like, we don't actually have to focus on our oppression all the time. But if we don't have the carved out spaces in order to be able to focus on something else, the permission, spaces like this, right? Like where it's like, yeah, let's just be in a room and talk about how to conjure joy with each other. Because it's important. It's as important as talking about how to end the murder of Black trans women, right? It's as important
yeah.
as talking about police violence. It's as important as those things because it's those things that are going to help us actually make it through from generation to generation, from year to year. So yeah, I really feel really excited about exploring that. I have my project the what used to be Transvisible now is the Trans Alchemy Project, and we've been really intentional in our rebranding and um, revamping of our work to create more spaces of connection, right? We've heard our community loud and clear of like, listen, what you all do is you give me a place, right? Especially for folks who, what came to us in 2020, especially were like Black trans folks and trans folks of color who were living in places where in their communities, there actually aren't trans resources
That's right.
because we're Southern rooted. Folks are living in rural communities where they don't have a trans center, they don't have an LGBTQ center, they don't even see or talk to other trans people. So many people came to some of our programming in 2020 and 2021 and were like, this is the first time I've ever talked to another trans person, right? Like it's like that out there for folks still. And I think it's easy to forget that when you live close to places like Atlanta or New York or Oakland, that like there's a whole big old country where like folks are just trying to be themselves in environments that don't reflect them at all. And so how important it is for us to make in-person and virtual gathering spaces for and with each other.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So looking at this year, let's you said we're conjuring joy, how to do that. So looking ahead for the year, what are some of the things that you think you're looking forward to in terms of creating joy or how you're looking to do that?
Yeah, one of the things that I'm thinking about and have been thinking about, and again, the pandemic has let me open, is the idea of play, right? Like, what are the things that I do for just the pure play of it? And so for me, that really has been like, how do I play in nature? How do I play at the ocean and by the sea? And so making more trips into nature spaces. Living in Georgia, there's like it's lake country, you know that. So
Mhm.
I'm excited to visit more of the lakes because I found like my sense of wonder and amusement and fun really comes out when I'm by bodies of water. So I'm looking at what does it look like to play. I have I'm a little crafty and a little arty. So I do some crafting and art. So I'm going to be really setting up like my crafting and arting station in my home so that I can make a commitment to spending time just crafting and doing art. Again, a place where for me, play is that place where it's like, right, like it gets me as close to bliss as I can imagine because there's a way that I can just let go. All of my like younger selves get to come to the table and we all just get to be like silly and have a good time. So I'm really looking forward to that. And then, again, creating intentional places for connection here at Acorn that are not just about healing, but also about play, also about just connecting for connecting's sake. So thinking about what does it look like to be, since we have so much land here, we have a pool here. So maybe doing like movie pool parties and things like that that are specifically for the trans community so that folks can have a place to like let go and let all of it down and then go back out into the world. Acorn gives you that very, you kind of come through the gates and you're like, oh, I'm in a different place. And then I'm going to do all of this play and then I'll go back out. So those are just some of the things that I'm looking forward to that are going to be bringing me joy this year. And just the idea of like basking, and I think on the work end, because joy is in my work too, like, and it should be in our work. On the work end, like I was saying with Trans Alchemy, we're really revamping a lot of our work. And so really digging deep into um, doing a residency program and really uplifting trans art and trans artists and art making and art production, and not just for art making and art production's sake, which sometimes I think trans artists don't get the ability to do that. Like they always have to be in response mode to the latest, dehumanizing thing. And so it's like, where do we go where our creativity is actually able to lead us? And that feels really exciting to me. And also, we're going to be starting a Black trans spiritual community called the House of Olokun. And I'm really excited to see what happens with that because, again, it just, again, anything that, and I find that with joy and conjuring joy, it's like the pieces of ourselves that we get back, like the pieces of our humanity that we get to reclaim in those moments of joy is hands down like the thing that makes me the most happy because it's like, oh, right, you think we can't be this or can't do this or we don't have space to do that in your world? That's fine. We'll just make it for ourselves and we'll fill it with pleasure and we'll fill it with joy and we'll fill it with play, so that we can reclaim our own humanity. So that's what I'm looking forward to this year, for Conjuring Joy. Are there any things that you're looking forward to, Amara?
Yeah, I think all of that sounds great. And it was also giving me ideas. I was like, wow, House of Olakun, that's very powerful. Make sure you talk to Olakun first. um,
Done and done. Trust me. I wouldn't even be saying it out loud of my mouth. Not just anyway. There's been a whole
right.
situation, but yeah.
All right, perfect, perfect. What was I gonna say? For me, I think it's thinking about more creative projects for myself.
Mm,
In addition to all of the standard work that I do through TransLash, which we're gonna do even more this year, and I'm excited about the work that we're gonna do, even though it's gonna be a really tough year and a lot of hard work, emotionally and stuff. I think it's gonna be good. But thinking about as much as what are creative projects that I can initiate for myself that allow me to
mm-hmm,
connect to my expression and my joy that don't have anything to do with kind of the world around me. So I think that that's it. I also think I'm being intentional about figuring out a really because I didn't have any pod the first time because I was like I don't trust y'all, like I was like pods because human beings are fickle and frail. So, they don't always act right and do what they're supposed to be doing. So I know
mm-hmm,
that. So I think that I am also thinking about creating a pod, but a very tiny one, like one or two people,
mm-hmm,
who I can even, I know where they are, know what they're doing in order to be able to have that space and have that community as well. That's one of the things that I'm thinking about. I'm also thinking as well about trips, honestly. Hoping that we get another break towards the late spring. And like we did
mm-hmm,
last year, things started to clear by May. And then,
mm-hmm,
over the summer and like literally dreaming about those places and where I want to be and using that as a tool to also get me excited.
mm-hmm,
Um, I think those are some of the things that I'm thinking about for this year, and that I think are important, and also like literally doing things to cultivate love, because like it's like a we think of love as a state, but it's actually a cultivation.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
You know what I'm talking about? And so like
Yeah.
literally cultivating that. What does it look like? What does it feel like? What are the things that I can do to vibe? How, all of those things. So those are some of my trans joy ideas I think for this year and this like really dark and uncertain time.
Those sound beautiful. I mean, the thing that I'm just picking up on is like, right at this point in your life, how do you get to play? You know, like I feel like you're Amara Jones, and you have to always be in response to all of the things that are happening to trans people. Where are the places of play that you find for yourself, and you know, are you able to build on those in 2022? And what would it be like for us to know about that more? Like, I want to know more about how you play, you know?
For the parts of it that can be revealed. No, I'm kidding. Um, no, I think, yeah, I think that that's right. And I think thinking about, but a lot of those moments are actually internal, you know,
Hmm.
it's weird. It's like, you know, I was just upstate, for 4 days in like a secluded tiny house on 30 acres by myself. And it was a way for me to like connect it. And I was stunned, um, and was brought a lot of joy by just the wildlife that's around there, like the birds and the deers, and like hearing, like I kept hearing this brook and I couldn't find it, and so one day I went on a hunt for it and then I found it, and you know, like things like that
Yes.
that were excuse me, that are amazing. Those aren't the best Instagrammable moments. Like you can't like stay with me for an hour as I hunt for a brook in the woods. Be like, you know, people would be asleep. So yeah, I think that that's also, but it is about how um, you know, share that joy, because that's also the
Yeah.
other thing about joy is that joy spreads.
Yeah.
And so to the degree that you can do things that show people that you're experiencing joy in a moment and connection, that will allow them to do the same, because more is more as human beings. I believe the more, you know.
Absolutely. I've definitely, you know, more than once, a critique has come back about how I could be talking about things like joy or pleasure or connection or belonging when the world is what it is. And I'm like, great. I'm happy for those critiques. And I was like, because I'm not ignorant to I'm never telling anybody to turn away from what the world is.
That's right.
Um, but I'm always saying we can actually go through this world into another world and create something for ourselves inside of that so that we can actually respond to the conditions that are around us in a much more powerful and majestic way,
That's
right?
right.
So I think the sharing of our joys, you know, and it's been really interesting about how to curate my like social media life and things like that, where I'm, you know, mostly in my feed, I get the happy moments, you know, from people's lives. I don't know what else is happening in their lives, but I do get a lot of happy moments, right? Where people are getting, you know, big moments of marriage and weddings, or small moments of like, I found this leaf and I took a picture of it and I thought it was important enough for me to share it with all of you. And I'm like, yes, like this is your thing. You know, I have a friend, Elizabeth White, and she really talks about this idea of enchantment, right? Like how we can come back into being
Mm,
enchanted with each other, ourselves, our desires, nature, the
mhm.
wonder of it all. And how do we share that with you, with each other for sure? Because it will beget more of that. And we need so much more of that, right? Like, if I think about the ways in which, you know, there used to be back in the day where they would be like, you know, for every one criticism, you need to give like, what is it, five praises or something like that. That's how I feel about joy. It's like, listen, every time I hear about, you know, more, you know, hundreds of thousands of people dying, in this country from a condition that could be being dealt with in a different way, because it is in other countries. I need to look at five things that are absolutely frivolous, joyful, pleasurable. I need to cook two meals, like for every one thing. So I think the more we are sharing that with each other and
Yeah.
creating spaces where we can share that with each other, the better off in the long run we will all be together.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Um, so I wanted to end with, you know, because we're assuming people have freedom and that people have movement and other things. And like not sometimes you literally are trapped in yourself and trapped in your space. And I was thinking about when I was a kid growing up how I couldn't express my girlhood because I
Mhm.
grew up in a household and in a society and a place that wasn't accepting of that. And there are way too many people that still experience that more than we
Yeah.
would like to admit. And I realized that one of the things that used to give me joy was me, and this is just something that I created in my head, is that what I would do when I was a kid at night was I would go through my entire day and reimagine it as if I had been allowed to express my
Oh,
girlhood, right?
yes.
And that was the thing that actually, like, that's the thing that actually saved me throughout my childhood, was the ability to be able to do that, to be able to hold that, because what I was doing was creating space for myself and I didn't know it, and it actually brought me joy. And I created that, at night in my bed, in my
Mhm.
own head, like
Mhm.
that had nothing to do with anyone seeing me. That was something that I created for myself. And so I think that even in these dark moments, it's important for us to think about what are the things that we can do without any other thing that can be our torchlight.
Absolutely. My thing when I was little to be inside of my own masculinity, and I didn't really understand, I never gotten into the drag scene as an adult or any sort of like karaoke scene as an adult. But when I was a kid, so very few people know this, and I'm glad that there are very few people on here. I was obsessed with Tom Jones. For folks who don't know who that is, he's like a soul pop singer from the 70s,
Whales.
80s, right? So, but I would very much in that same way, like I knew every word to every song he sang at some point in my childhood at about 8 years old. And I would be in my room and I would be Tom Jones. That's what I could do. And I would continue that on with like different rappers that I enjoyed and things like that, where I would be able to embody in myself a kind of masculinity that I looked up to at that particular time in my life. And it felt really good. So, absolutely, never want to say that joy and pleasure has to do with resources, has to do with what kind of abilities you have or don't have, or what kind of access you have or don't have. Like it is something that, as you said earlier, could be just an internal process within yourself, your own sense of wonder. My imagination is absolutely wild. If you ask me on a good day, I likely will tell you that I'm an alien. And that brings me so much joy. And if you ask me more questions about it, I can go into all of the like, how I'm an alien and why and all of that stuff. And that stuff comes from childhood too, of just like being able to use my own mind and my own imagination and be in wonder and fancy and enchantment with that as well. So, yeah, thanks for bringing that in.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you for offering that. And thank you just for the last, like, 40 minutes. I really appreciate it. I have to say that I feel better now than when I started. And that's a good thing. And it's just powerful to be reminded that, like, we have the ability to be able to have all these different strategies to figure out ways to create joy and get us through this year. And I just appreciate you being in conversation and sharing these.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I also feel very lifted and light, and I'm very excited to like get into my house and get into getting my creative station together. So I appreciate you offering and asking me to be in this conversation. And I just hope folks who are listening have these conversations with your people. Do what we just did, and see how you feel afterwards as well. So that's really exciting.
Yeah, and thanks to everyone for listening. You can share this conversation. It's recorded. It'll be on my timeline. So for people who weren't able to join, or if you want to use it as a tool with your organizations, or even individually, feel free to do so. It's there as a resource. So have a great day, everyone. Thank you for joining, and thank you, Emmanuel. Really appreciate it.
Appreciate you too as well. Have a good day, everybody.
Okay, bye.